Hi and welcome to Crash Course Catholicism, a podcast about Catholic teaching and why it makes sense. I'm your host, Caitlin West. Hey friends, welcome to episode 67. This is our second episode on unity and diversity in the Catholic Church. In our last episode, we talked about the need for unity within the Church, that as Catholics we need to be wholly united to each other. So just a brief recap, unity doesn't mean that we all look and act and think exactly the same in every way all the time. There is a healthy and legitimate diversity of vocations and interests and ways of living out our Catholicism that can exist within the Church. But when it comes to our one shared faith and to our love for one another, we should all be completely united as a single body, the mystical body of Christ. And actually, this is something that we didn't touch on in the last episode, but it is worth noting that unity doesn't just mean remaining united to the teachings of the Church and to the magisterium and the Pope. It also means being united to one another as individuals. So in our last episode, we ended with the idea that we all have one shared vocation, a vocation to holiness. And part of our mission as Christians is to encourage each other in that vocation, to help each other be holy, to pray for each other, even to correct each other with charity when we can see someone that we love headed in the wrong direction. So this is our first calling as Catholics. We need to be united to each other. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about the order of charity, the need for us to put God first before all things. He's number one. And then next, to love and look after the people that he has put closest to us. So the members of our families, the people in our faith community. But beyond that call to unity within the Church, we have also received a mission to seek unity with others outside of the Catholic faith. In Matthew 28:19-20, Jesus tells his disciples, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you." So this is a mission that has been explicitly given to us by Jesus. We are called to bring the gospel to others who don't share our faith. As Catholics, we believe that the Church established by Jesus Christ is the Catholic Church, and that is the one true Church. So we want to create opportunities for other people to discover the joy that comes with being Catholic. So in this episode, we're going to think about this mission of evangelization. We're first going to think about the role of the institutional Church and how the Catholic Church can and does create opportunities, kind of official opportunities for dialogue with other denominations and religions. And then we're going to think about these ideas as they relate to the individual. So what can I personally do to bring the gospel to others? So, beginning with the mission of the Church on a kind of grander scale, how does the Catholic Church, as well as individual dioceses, parishes, and groups within the Church, encourage dialogue with other denominations and religions? So the project of seeking unity and dialogue with other Christian denominations, so non-Catholic Christians, that's referred to as ecumenism. Ecumenism is a fancy word that just means reaching out to Christians who are not in full communion with the Catholic Church. In his encyclical Unum Sint, Pope St. John Paul II tells us that ecumenism is actually an integral part of our Christian mission. He says, it is not just some sort of appendix which is added to the Church's traditional activity. Rather, ecumenism is an organic part of her life and work, and consequently must pervade all that she is and does. When Jesus first founded his church, he founded one church. So not many churches. And he prayed to God the Father that all should be one. It was not his vision for the Christian religion to be divided into denominations and to disagree on really important doctrinal points. So this desire for unity, not just between Catholics but with all Christians, is really important. One of the active projects of the Catholic Church is to try to repair the division that has come about through things like the Protestant Reformation. So that's ecumenism. And then when we talk about engaging with people from other religions who aren't Christian, we use a different word. We call it interfaith dialogue. So this relates to our dialogue with people who aren't Christian at all. Now, both of these projects, ecumenism and interfaith dialogue, are super important to the Catholic Church, and the goal of both of them is to listen respectfully to others, to understand their beliefs, and maintain their right to freedom of religion, while also proclaiming the gospel. So, what do ecumenism and interfaith dialogue actually look like tangibly? Well, as a way into answering that question, let's first think about what these things are not. So firstly, ecumenism and interfaith dialogue are not the same as relativism. They don't mean treating all religions as exactly the same or watering down the differences between us. Although we want to reach out to other faiths and denominations, we don't want to go so far that we no longer affirm our belief that the Catholic Church offers the fullness of truth. So Pope John Paul II writes that it is not a question of altering the deposit of faith, changing the meaning of dogmas, eliminating essential words from them, accommodating truth to the preferences of a particular age, or suppressing certain articles of the creed. The unity willed by God can be attained only by adherence to all the content of revealed faith in its entirety. In matters of faith, compromise is in contradiction with God who is truth. So those are some really strong words. Basically what he's saying is that we always need to maintain the full truth of the Catholic faith. We don't compromise on the truth. Secondly, though, on the flip side, ecumenism and interfaith dialogue also does not mean forcing Catholicism onto other people or not respecting their religious freedom. In the Vatican II document Dignitatis Humanae, it says, "The human person has a right to religious freedom. All should have such immunity from coercion by individuals or by groups or by any human power that no one should be forced to act against his conscience in religious matters, nor prevented from acting according to his conscience." So we also don't ever want to impose on other people's religious freedom. The Catholic Church is never going to go around being like, everyone has to be Catholic. Or to have kind of official dialogue with people where we're like beating them over the head with Catholicism and trying to force them to agree with us. So, how do we avoid these two ends of the spectrum, relativism and coercion? Well, to answer that question, we might think about, kind of on a smaller scale, how we would talk to an individual person who doesn't agree with us. So imagine that you're having a conversation with a friend about a really important topic, say euthanasia. Now you go into this conversation with a really clear and solid set of beliefs. You're not going in unsure or still figuring out the truth. You've spent a long time thinking about it and praying and researching, and you've arrived at a firm conviction that euthanasia is wrong. So you're not about to bend on that. You're not going into the conversation being like, might change my mind. No, you're going to hold fast to what you believe is true. However, you are aware that your friend is totally convinced that euthanasia can actually be a good thing. Now, ultimately, of course, you would like your friend to agree with you. But if you go in there all guns blazing and you beat them over the head with it and try to compel them to agree with you, chances are they're just going to shut down and you're going to push them away. But on the flip side, if you go in with an attitude of like, oh, well, my truth is my truth and your truth is your truth and it doesn't really matter, then not only are you not going to make much progress, you're also going to end up betraying your own beliefs, your own belief that this is objectively wrong. So what do? Well, the first thing to do is to listen. Sit with your friend and really try to understand where they're coming from. Make sure that you're not misrepresenting their beliefs, that you really get what they believe and why they believe it. And then the second thing is to find common ground, because 99% of the time, it will be there. And finding common ground is not the same as compromising. It's finding those things that you do actually agree on. Because if you're having a conversation where you're both sort of like, say you want to play a game of football and you're both standing on opposite football fields, you can't play a game. You have to wait until you're on some kind of common ground so that you can actually start to have that discussion. So maybe you and your friend can agree that, okay, we need better palliative care. Or maybe you agree that it's important not to unnecessarily prolong someone's suffering. So notice how this isn't us finding compromises. It's not us saying, oh, well, I can change what I think and you change what you think. We're saying, okay, where are the areas where we can actually connect? Because without that connection, we kind of can't move forward. There's nowhere to go from there. So finding common ground, and then from that place of mutual understanding and connection, you can find a way to move forward. And maybe you won't change that person's mind in one conversation. In fact, you probably won't. But you might open up a path that eventually leads to them accepting some aspects of your position, or at least the two of you walk away understanding and appreciating why the other person thinks the way that they do. It's kind of like a baby steps approach. So if we return to the question of ecumenism and interfaith dialogue, we can see the same thing happening. This is what the Catholic Church does when she engages with other faiths. She creates opportunities for different churches and denominations to sit and talk and listen to each other, to explain or express their own beliefs, and then to find a path forward together where possible without ever compromising on the truth. So a really great example of ecumenical dialogue is the 1999 Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification. So this was a joint statement that was made by both the Catholic and Lutheran churches. Basically, Catholics and Lutherans came together and they spent a really long time discussing the question of justification. What does it mean to be justified? What does it mean to be saved? Are we saved by faith alone, or by good works, or by some combination of the two? And obviously this is a really important question because it was right at the heart of the Protestant Reformation. So, after lots of discussion, Catholics and Lutherans realized that actually, for like the last 500 years, we've kind of been talking past each other, and actually, we do agree that true faith in God does save us, but with that faith must also come good works. So that's actually a point that we can agree on and move forward from. So notice how in this instance, we didn't come to an agreement on every single thing, right? It's not like the Lutheran Church came into full communion with the Catholic Church, but tangible progress was still made towards unity. We found common ground and moved forward from there. And then B, the Catholic Church did not compromise on the truth. It's not like we said, oh, well, I guess we can kind of change our doctrine a bit and you change yours a bit and then we'll agree. No, instead it was about sitting, listening, clarifying our own points of view, finding common ground, and then seeing how we can move forward. Now, when it comes to interfaith dialogue, obviously the path to unity there looks a little bit different because we don't share those same core fundamental beliefs that Jesus is God and salvation comes through him, etc. So while we still have that same process of listening to each other and finding common ground, finding a way forward, there's also this added element which we refer to as proclamation. So proclamation refers to proclaiming the truth of the gospel with respect and while upholding the right of others to freedom of religion. So a really good example of a kind of interfaith encounter is the 1986 Day of Prayer for Peace in Assisi. This was a day of prayer that was organised by Pope St. John Paul II, in which he invited all of the heads of the world's major religions to come together in unity and pray for peace. Now, on this day of prayer, each religious group was given time to pray in the same vicinity as each other, but separately. So they each said their own prayers, and at one point they all went to their own places of worship to pray. And then at the end of the day, they came together to meditate together on the need for peace and to call for peace together. Now, if you read John Paul II's closing address from that day of prayer, one of the first things he says in that address is he reaffirms the Christian belief that Jesus Christ is the one true Lord and Saviour. And then he also extends an invitation to the other faiths to engage in dialogue with the Catholic Church. So the striking thing about this encounter was that, first of all, John Paul II found a way to seek a kind of common ground between religions without becoming relativistic. So it's not like John Paul II said, oh, well, we're all going to come together and pray in the same way. Like first, everyone is going to say an Our Father, and then we'll all say a Jewish prayer, and then a Muslim prayer, because all religions are essentially the same. No, everyone was united in prayer, but there was a clear distinction. There was a respect for and acknowledgement of the different beliefs that were there. Secondly, the Pope proclaimed the gospel, right? He proclaimed his belief that Jesus Christ is Lord and Saviour without forcing that belief on anyone. And then thirdly, he invited dialogue with other faiths. So in this example, we can see this twofold aim of dialogue and proclamation. Interfaith dialogue, yes, it's about finding a common ground, but never to the point where we ignore or downplay our differences, or we neglect our mission to proclaim the gospel. Now, this project of seeking unity with people outside our faith doesn't just fall to the institutional church. It also falls to each of us as individuals to spread the gospel to people in our everyday lives. And we call this mission apostolate. In 1965, the Second Vatican Council published a decree called, and this one's really hard to pronounce, so bear with, Apostolicam Actuositatem, nailed it, which is a decree on the apostolate of the laity. So the laity meaning the everyday person in the Catholic Church, not priests and religious. In this document, it says, our own time requires of the laity no less zeal. In fact, modern conditions demand that their apostolate be broadened and intensified. So we all have an urgent, very real task to bring Christ to other people in the world. That's the responsibility of every single one of us. And apostolate is so important because lay people can often reach areas where the clergy and the institutional bodies of the church can't on their own. Like we can go to parties and meet people at work and school and university in our everyday lives. Every single one of us can and should spread the gospel wherever we're placed in the world. So, what does it mean to be an apostle? Because that's what apostolate is. It's just being an apostle in the world. Well, first and foremost, it means just being ourselves, being a living witness to the truth of the gospel in the way that we live our faith in our everyday lives. We cannot underestimate the good that we can do when we simply live our lives as Catholics in the world. I know of this girl once who was a university student and a Catholic. And one day she was like hanging out with all her friends, and they were all atheists, and they were all at uni hanging out. And the time came for her to head to Mass because there was a daily Mass on campus. So she got up and she started packing up her stuff. And her friends were like, where are you going? And she was like, oh, I'm going to Mass. And her friends were totally confused. They were like, what? But it's a weekday. It's not Sunday. Why are you going to church? And this girl was like, yeah, well, actually, in the Catholic Church, we can go to Mass every day of the week. We don't just have to go on Sundays. And then she told them how there's like a chapel on campus and they had daily Mass, etc. And so these friends were a little bit taken aback, but they were cool with it. Like, I mean, it's one of the advantages of living in a world that's really into tolerance. People are like, oh, well, I guess I better tolerate this too. Anyway, so a few weeks later, this girl is hanging out with the same group of friends, except this time there are a few new people sitting with the group. So time for Mass comes rolling around and this girl starts packing up her stuff and walking away. And as she can walk away, she can hear her friends explaining to the new people where she's going. They're like, yeah, did you know that you can actually go to Mass every day? Like you don't just have to go on Sundays. And actually there's a chapel on this campus and they have daily Mass, and they're like telling them the whole thing. So for these people, I mean, okay, maybe they're not going to convert to Christianity on the spot, but they've been introduced to the idea of faith, to the idea that you can go to Mass during the week. And that's an idea that they might not have encountered anywhere else in their lives. And maybe they're not going to have some radical turnaround, but that's planting a seed that would not have otherwise been planted. Maybe they won't encounter those ideas anywhere else. So that's just one example, but there are many other situations that we might find ourselves in where people notice that we are not participating in workplace gossip, or we're being kind to others, or we're really joyful even when things are going badly. Whatever it is, just our presence in the world can be a witness to the truth of the gospel. Now, just like with ecumenism, apostolate involves dialoguing with people who don't share our faith. Now, the first step there is that we have to actually have friends who don't share our faith. As Catholics, or I mean, even just as people in general, it's so easy to stay in our safe little bubble where we only hang out with people who think the same things as us. And we can kind of end up in this self-affirming loop where it's very comfortable. However, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith says in a letter to bishops that the Church is not a reality closed in on herself. Rather, she is permanently open to missionary and ecumenical endeavour. So, this is a question that we can ask ourselves. How many people do I know who are different from me? Do I have friends, and not just acquaintances, people I incidentally rub shoulders with at school or work, Friends, do I get close to people who are non-Catholic and non-Christian? Do I have friends who are maybe in a same-sex relationship, or they're living with their partners, or they have different opinions on important topics? Do I really know how to love those people, to listen to them, to deeply understand their opinions and their lives and their concerns, while still maintaining and proclaiming the truth of my faith? So this is the second kind of arm of apostolate. It's not just about being a witness to the gospel with our actions, it's also about friendship, personal friendship, getting to know and love people who don't share our faith. Now, this can be kind of a scary idea because we might worry that if we get too close to people who are different from us, we could end up being influenced by them. We might kind of catch their beliefs, as it were. And in one sense, this is not an unreasonable concern. It's true that we do tend to be influenced by the people we spend the most time with. So, to answer that concern, let's turn to my favourite thing, which is an analogy. So imagine that you are in a really strong, sturdy, safe castle. And outside the castle walls, there's like some kind of battle going on, and there are people in the thick of it who really need your help. They're facing some kind of threat or danger, and they need your help, and it's help that you can give. However, there's also a bunch of dangers outside, and you know that if you go out there into the battle, you're going to have to face those dangers. So in that situation, you have a few options. Option number one is you stay inside the castle where it's safe and you know that nothing is going to get you. And you could do that, but then the people outside aren't going to get any help. Option two is you throw yourself out there into the breach with no preparation and no armor. You just go running out completely defenseless, and then you immediately get killed by like an orc because you have nothing to defend yourself with. Okay, that's option two. Option three is that you put on some armor. You put on a great big fat suit of armor and you pick up your big old sword and your shield, and then you know that you can safely go out there and all those arrows are going to be like pinging off you, and of course you still have to remain vigilant, but it's much less likely that you're going to get killed by an orc. So, it's the same with us. Yes, if we go out into the world and try to engage with people who don't agree